Hey, Sean here from SpeedCubeReview.com. I really enjoy Fewest Moves. That's my favorite event. I find it enjoyable and there's a lot of new stuff. And I said in my big tutorial video, something along the lines of advanced would be under 30 moves on average. And that's sort of been my goal. And I've pretty much achieved that. I'm averaging very high 20s. And one thing I don't really enjoy doing is domino reduction just on every single solve. I'll check it out and I'll do it, but that's a whole nother video. And what I want to go over today is actually just a recent average or mean of 3 that I did for an online competition. And my 3 solves were a 27, a 29, and a 28. And I feel like I did kind of an interesting trick on each one that is something not hard to do, but I feel is something that might be overlooked by a lot of people that are around this range. So to really be able to follow along, I expect that you know some fewest moves things, such as inverting the scramble as well as insertions. With that said, if you don't know that, feel free to follow along anyway. So we're going to go through the first solve, and we're not going to go through the whole thing. I'll put notes in the description of the scrambles and my full solution, so you can check that out as well as some notes there. But the first solution, what I ended up doing is pretty quickly within the solve, I was at 14 moves and everything was solved except for 3 edges and 5 corners or 4 corners? And 4 corners. So 3 edges and 4 corners. So it was pretty much solved with that. And the first thing I tried to do was find a spot that I could insert a sexy move or another trigger. Often when you have 3 edges and a few corners, instead of trying to insert some crazy edge algorithm, if you can find a spot you can do a sexy move, sometimes you can do a sexy move which also solves some of the corners, or at least just moves around those corners, leaving you still with 4 corners but solving the edges in like 4 moves. And I couldn't find a good spot. So my other thought was, if I can find a really good spot to insert the corners, or at least make it to 3 edges and 3C, then I would continue with this skeleton. Because although it was a really good skeleton, if the insertions were bad, it could have easily been in mid to upper 30s if I couldn't find anything good, or at least low 30s. So I did find a spot where I can insert the corners and cancel 6 moves. So instead of 14 moves to 3 edges and 4 corners, it was 16 moves to 3 edges and 3 corners. Much better. After that, it was hard finding really much of anything. I couldn't find a good edge insertion that I really liked that wasn't some crazy 10-move edge insertion with a bunch of weird cancellations. And I only found a corner insertion that canceled 2. So my initial thought was, okay, do that corner insertion, cancels 2. I found a spot to solve the edges in 7 moves that canceled nothing, which is awful. And I'd end up with a 29. Not bad. Here's the trick. Here's the thing that you always want to check. Nested insertions. What nested insertions means is that you have an insertion inside of a insertion you already inserted. If you're watching this and someone else is listening that has no idea what I'm talking about, that sounded weird. A couple things with nested insertions. You don't really need to check that much. If you stickered the puzzle, you just check 4 or 5 places, or just a couple if you really know what you're looking for. And so I had found the 29, but I decided to see if there were any edges in the corner insertion I already did. And I decided to check the edge insertion to see if a corner insertion could work. And that's where the corner insertion worked. I don't really need to show the puzzle for this one, so I'm just going to show you all this stuff here. And inside that edge insertion, there was this corner insertion, which canceled 4 instead of 2. So I ignored the one I found that canceled 2 and used that other one, which gave me 27. So I canceled a couple extra moves just by checking that nested insertion. There's always some things you can check, and it doesn't hurt to check those. One thing I also do, whenever I write out my skeleton, if I have, let's say, a U and a D move right after each other, or an L and R, or F and B, I underline those, telling myself that they could be swapped either way and it still works. Because there's often things that I actually have missed in official competition where I did something like D prime U2 D2 or something like that, and I didn't realize that the D, I knew the Ds could cancel out, but I missed it because I didn't underline it. So that was the first one. Second one, I will show you some stuff here. So the second solution, I went through a couple different things, and one thing that I found was a skeleton that was everything except for 2 edges and 2 corners in 20 moves. And there's 2 main algorithms for this. So here is where I'm going to grab the puzzle and show you this. The first one is a J permutation, the other one's a T permutation, but not the normal J and normal T permutation. So I'll show you the J permutation first. It's 10 moves, and I'll just sort of execute it here. There we go, 10 moves. It's not really finger trick friendly, so I wouldn't use it for any speed solving. And one thing to note with any J permutation or anything that swaps 2 edges and 2 corners is that you could invert those moves and it does the exact same thing. So I'll look for things like this and say, okay, well with this I can do, starts with an F2 and ends with an R, or is it R2? I think it ends with an R2. Or I could start with an R2. It gives me 2 options here. So I do the F2, take that edge out, or take that pair out, F2, and then a bunch of R moves. I'll write that algorithm below. So that's a good one to know. So basically you stick your puzzle and look for a spot where they line up in a J-perm, or, you know, the mirror, and you could just do it on the other side. T-perm's really interesting. There's a F2L algorithm that I've shown before that's something like R2 YDU, R2 YDU prime R2. And it would solve, let's say, this and this. And so what the T-perm is doing that, and then doing it inverted, like doing a Y prime and then doing it this way. So I'm now doing, starting with a B2 instead of an R2. And then you have to do one more D prime. So this is 11 moves for this T-perm. And to make things simple, you can write wide moves for your solution. Always do, like, instead of a lowercase d, do a dw. I think lowercase can count. I can't remember what the rules are. I believe it does count now, but just do that to be safe, because lowercase is not always as obvious as, like, I think, what is it? L can be kind of weird, lowercase L. I think that's about it. Oh, lowercase and uppercase F can be kind of weird too. So with that, so I was 11 moves. So what I did was I went through my skeleton and I basically first just stickered it and found a spot where the stickers line up. There was no spot for a J-perm insertion, but for here, right here, we have a T permutation. And again, with this, the algorithm you can do starting like this, that starts with a B and ends with an L, or invert it, start with an L, end with a B. You could start it on the left side, start with this B and L, or start with that L and B. It's kind of the same thing there. And so here, the last letter before I would insert this is a B, and the one after it's an L. So if I do this algorithm, I can cancel one of the B's and cancel one of the L's. So they cancel into each other. And so that was 11 moves, canceled 2, inserting or solving that with 9 moves. Not super great, but it still gave me a 29 in the end. And like I said, this isn't, you know, the greatest solves ever. These are not even close to some of my best solves. It's just a nice consistent average, and something that if you're an intermediate solver, knowing these 2 algorithms is great. So trick 2, I like to convert the algorithms to just regular letter names. If I have time, I'll do it. If I don't, I'll do wide moves. So if I do this T-perm again, is any wide move, if you do the opposite letter, that's what it would be. So for example, the first move I would do here after the R2, let me hold it like this to make it easier. Instead of being a wide U, it would be a D. And then I see that this is B, so that would be B2. And then instead of YDU prime, I just call it a D prime. And then wide R2. And then F2, instead of this being a wide U prime, it's D prime. L2, because that's the L face. And then instead of this being wide U, it's D. F2, and then U prime. So if you have time, you can do that. You don't need to. I just really like to do that, especially if you're doing more than one insertion and you've used wide moves for something else. It's much easier to find cancellations that way, at least for me. Okay, so we have one tip, which is looking at the nested insertions. One tip that is looking for 2-edge and 2-corner insertions. And the third one is just trying weird things. What I mean by that, so there's let me just catch up to where I was at. I was at F2L-2. So let's find my let's build up to where I was at. Okay, so I was at F2L-2. Now this isn't always a great setup because the corners are in opposite spots. It's often nicer to have a 2x2x3 block. So one thing to always think of, if you ever have a situation like this, the last move I did was an L2. And this is actually on the inverse. So this is, you have to be able to do inverse and regular for this sort of thing to work, or at least have the concept of it. Instead of doing L2 to actually solve it, you can just do L prime. And that gives you a pseudo 2x2x3. So on the regular, you would just do an L move, and that would complete the 2x2x3. So basically, you're creating that pseudo block. You're setting up to a 2x2x3, and that might give you more options up top then. It adds one move, but one move with a lot more options is really beneficial. I was testing this out, and it actually set up things really nicely, where I could insert this by doing that, and then insert this by doing that. But I didn't like this result. It was basically two edges, and I didn't like it so much. I tried inserting like a soon, and that kind of worked, but it wasn't great. There's other things you could do. You could maybe do that, and then insert it like this. Actually, no, that would result in the same thing. Doing this, then inserting it. And actually made a pair like that. I actually don't know if I tried this specific one. But there's a lot of different things you can do. I mean, you could also insert this and then do something else with this one, or pair this up in a different way. So there's a lot of different things. What I ended up doing was pairing it up, not moving it yet, just leaving it there, inserting this. And then for this, I just did F2 L prime. Also, yeah, because I wanted it set up here. So I saw that this edge was here. So I tried that. But I tried a few different things. But I realized there's so many pieces solved here. And so I could have just done two edges, or sorry, two corners, this corner and this corner. And then this edge, this edge, this edge, this edge. 2 corners, 4 edges, not great. But when I tried to insert this, it actually just gave me 3 corners. Now, I don't think I've ever had a skeleton that was 25 to 3/4 that I liked. I didn't have a lot of time left. And so I decided to try it. And since there was a lot of RFR prime moves or LU, there's a lot of those kind of moves throughout it, gave me a lot of hope that there was some good cancellations. And there was a decent one. I had an 8 - 5, which gave me a 28. And so that's my 3 things. So just to review again, we have the first one, which is look for nested insertions. The second one, which is know some algorithms like the J and T-perm. And then also the last one is to really experiment with pairing things up. I know a couple solvers where they just do kind of like an F2L solve, a little more block building, and then they just mess around with pairing things up in different ways, and see what ends up. So those are my 3 tips for this. Really good for just taking it to the next level. If you don't know about inverting the scramble or insertions, please check that below in the FMC video. It's a long video, but jump through it. You don't have to watch it straight through. It's not like a movie. Thank you very much for watching. Leave your thoughts and questions in the comment section below. Hit like, subscribe for more content like this in the future. And as always, stop by speedcubeview.com for more news and reviews.